enjoy. A quick thank you to the T5 peeps, Bob the Dragon, Datamagnet, Cat Crab Lobster, Dark Machine, Astraya the Dreamer, Mezec, Feudic Jarl, and Casper Arnholtz. Thank you very much. War Xen, written by PodgeWrites. When the virus first took hold, we thought that we could contain it ourselves. After all, we were the Zentrasi, renowned across the spiral arm for our mastery of thinking machines, our skill with contained plasma weaponry, not to mention our industrial-scale production of Vespin rings used in the expansion of the gate system. We thought that we could contain it, but we didn't understand. The first cases were outside the major cities. We had never seen anything like it. Our frontline medical staff all required immediate psychological treatment to help them cope with the reality of the infection, which in the early days proved almost as burdensome as the healthcare system as the treatment of those afflicted with the virus itself. We had doctors and nurses fleeing their posts daily, and suicides became common more quickly than I would have possibly thought. All involved in the treatment of the infected, from healthcare professionals to military personnel, were placed under extreme mental stress. I say treatment, but in reality, there was little we could do. Those infected would lose their proprioception, causing them to bang into things without meaning to. The first signs of a new cluster of infected was often the uptick in the number of minor injuries being treated in an accident and emergency center. Later, sufferers would lose their vision, and then more important senses such as hearing and untranslatable. Finally, coma would ensue, followed by death within a few days. If that were all, it would have been a tragedy. But the disease did not stop there. When we finally requested the help of our local allies and mercenaries, the initial response was promising. We had hoped that outsiders would be less prone to the mental panic caused by seeing the infected. But when those early recruits came into contact with the enemy, most fled immediately, or demanded exorbitant sums just to help with the evacuation, or simply bombed their target mission areas from the air, killing uninfected civilians and destroying our infrastructure and our culture. In the climate of increasing panic, we swallowed our pride and turned to the Galactic Council itself. We reminded them of all the people of the Xen had done for the greater galactic community, our contributions to the Gate Project, our vital role in suppressing the Volai revolt, and the actions of our Special Forces teams at Redacted, the full records of which are sealed for the next 2 millennia by Council decree. We were assured of aid. A task force was assembled, outfitted with the best military units in the spiral, health professionals, and medical technology from dozens of worlds. We rejoiced. Finally, our salvation was at hand. But this time, all those who could afford to flee the planet had done so, at least as far as orbit, and those who could not had been gathered in refugee centers across the great continent. The task force arrived within a week of our request. A swift response, and we took this as a sign of hope. They took one look at our homeworld, at live infected subjects wandering the streets, screaming out for blood and untranslatable, at infected mercenaries of a dozen species, and they declared it all lost. There was immediate blockade, a quarantine, and the Council's initial promise turned to empty rhetoric. Of course, they would help. In time. When this was more understood, they explained. It was unethical to ask other species to fight such an enemy, to risk contamination by disease which had been shown to cross species barrier with inexplicable ease, and which could spread with as little as a bite or a scratch. They took their armored shock troops, their carriers, and their aid, and they used it all to lock us into what was now our prison. All this to watch us die, and, of course, to save themselves. I couldn't blame them, not really, even if I raged at the time. Who would come to fight such madness, to risk being turned into a mindless dead thing, to, perhaps, even be forced to kill others who'd been turned before them? Not I, nor any I knew. So, it was not with a little shock that I noticed the first of them break through the council blockade. I was stationed at the last interstellar communications array at the time, trapped planetside by the Council fleet, and already driven half-mad myself by the screams of the infected colleagues just beyond the compound walls. They came in a banged-up trade junker that was older than some civilizations, held together with tape and good wishes by the look of it. They requested landing permission with codes that were months out of date, but who was I to stop a ship arriving at this point? They touched down on our landing pad, and I made it my business to be there to greet them. I wanted to see the lunatics who had chosen to die alongside the Zentrazi race. The creatures themselves were average-sized bipedal organisms, not so different from ourselves, but disturbingly lacking any sort of untranslatable. My TC informed me that there were examples of a recently contacted species and a new addition to the community. They had barely left the home system, in fact, so it was strange indeed to find them here, all full 19 parsecs distant. I felt my hopes sink at this new information. It usually took a century or so for a new species to make any kind of impact on the galactic stage. The poor things were probably lost. I decided to try and get them off the planet if I could. The Council were often lenient with the newer species, but was prevented from saying as much by the squawk of an ancient translation device the humans suddenly thrust towards me. A device so old that it mangled our language even as it translated the humans' words. The thing began spitting out words in an old dialect once favored in our capital, but now spoken exclusively by only the lowliest of farmhands. "This here planet be with the zombie apocalypse." It was then that I noticed the creature was wearing clothing of some kind. On it was depicted another of his race, but with one of his manipulators having been replaced with some kind of gardening equipment. The creature itself, I realized, was lugging around a selection of similar equipment behind it in a cart of some sort, which only added to the ridiculousness of the situation. What plants did it mean to attend to here? "I said," the being repeated, more loudly this time, as though its terrible translation device could be improved upon by speaking at a raised volume, "Is this the planet with the zombies?" "Zombies?" I asked, unfamiliar with the word and unsure if it was a translation error. The creature bared its teeth, and what was later told was a smile. "Ah, so that thing's working. Yeah, zombies, dead folks that get up and walk around again. You got any?" "No!" I, untranslatable, in fear at the very reference to the infected, obtuse as it was. "Yes, that is correct, but please, you haven't the slightest idea of what they are. They are the dead of our species, loved and doomed and returned to a mockery of life. They are an affront to everything any civilized species could ever." But the creature was already walking back towards his ship. "George, what I tell you, that tentacle fellow wasn't screwing around. This place is the place. Get the boys and unload the buckshot. Time to kick ass." He looked back over his shoulder at me. "Hey, Boss Hog, we owe you anything for the pleasure." What? "I said we owe you anything for the use of the facilities, or can we just drive right in?" I assumed he meant docking fees, which hardly seemed to matter anymore, as our currency had long since lost value. "No," I stammered. No fees at all. Just go ahead and do whatever gardening you'd like, friend." He was mad, obviously. I didn't intend to get between him and whatever he planned to do with those gardening implements. They came in droves after that, and it took less than a year for the influx of these so-called humans to clear Zentrak of the zombies, as Billy Bob had labeled them. I learned his name only after the war was over, and we were looking for him with the intent of erecting a statue in his and his species' honor. In the end, he said he wasn't really one for statues. He just asked us for a six-pack and a ship to take him home. We gave him our capital vessel, the faded light of Holst, and 6 of everything that we could think of on the planet. He laughed when we presented this to him, but when his mirth was taken as unhappiness with our gift, he was quick to halt our offer of a second ship. He took what was offered and left, still laughing. Since then, the old dialect of humans early translators used has begun to spring up in cities again, not quite to the pleasure of all. Humans, as it turned out, weren't any better at combat than most, but for some reason they claimed was cultural, but which I suspect may have been some kind of inherent insanity. They simply loved fighting the risen dead. I can only assume that it was an evolved trait, selected for in response to repeated outbreaks of similar disease on their homeworld. A tragic planetary history, if ever I've heard one. That said, I'd never call a human crazy out loud, and neither would anyone else I know. Folk don't take kindly to that sort of talking then. End of story. And that, my friends, concludes this video. I hope that you enjoyed, and if you do, please consider supporting the author, even by popping over and leaving a thumbs up or a nice comment, just to show your appreciation for the story. However, if you wish to support this channel, there are links down below which will help immensely. I will see you all in the next one, and until then, I hope that you have a fantastic day. Cheers.